Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. My name is Jill Malandrino. Joining me this afternoon, we have Paul Bloom, Chief Business Officer at Gevo. As demand for high-integrity carbon removals rises and sustainable aviation fuels gain momentum, Gevo stands out with a rare dual solution, decarbonizing fuel production while permanently removing carbon from the atmosphere. A pioneer in circular energy systems, Gevo transforms agricultural feedstock into food and animal feed, produces low-carbon fuels like sustainable aviation fuel, and captures carbon dioxide that would otherwise be emitted. That carbon is stored underground and independently certified as high-quality carbon removal credits by Puro.Earth, a crediting program for engineered carbon removal in which Nasdaq is the majority owner. And this conversation will unpack how this end-to-end model works, why rigorous certification and permanence are essential for market trust, and how companies can leverage these credits to make meaningful progress toward their net zero goals. Paul, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thanks, Jill. It's great to be here.
And Gevo, you have an ambitious mission to decarbonize fuel production. What is Gevo's approach and how is it going?
Yeah, so no, thanks, Jill. It's at Gevo, we're really focused on delivering cost-effective fuels, chemicals, and carbon abatement from renewable resources. So it's really important to how we do that, right? So these fuels that we're producing today, like low carbon ethanol, in the future, we plan to convert that low carbon ethanol into things like SAF. And so SAF, synthetic aviation fuel, otherwise known as sustainable aviation fuel, is really identical to the jet fuel that we use today, except we plan to deliver a lot of carbon abatement in every gallon that we produce. So we've also developed a business called Verity that tracks and can prove that carbon abatement in every gallon. When you have a product that looks identical to the product that you're replacing or supplementing, you got to have that proof for the customers to show that they put all that benefit in that product and that they're getting what they're paying for. So this is really the thing that we do. So we track that through the whole supply chain from the field to the seat on the aircraft. And that's really where it's pretty complicated, but we try to take something really complicated and make it simple.
So Gevo describes its process as food to feed to carbonization, a decarbonization cycle. Can you walk us through that journey from the farm to fuels to carbon storage, to your point, and explain why it's a true example of a circular economy?
Sure. The first thing that you have to remember is that we have two types of things that we're thinking about. We're thinking about carbon removals and we're thinking about carbon avoidance as we're putting these fuels together. So at every step of the way, from the field to the seat, we're tracking that and making sure that we're focused on it. It's also important to remember where does the carbon come from in our fuel, which is actually the CO2 that's in the atmosphere today. So it all starts really at the farm because the plants that we're using, typically we're converting carbohydrates. So those carbohydrates come from corn. Well, corn gets the carbon that we actually use from CO2 in the atmosphere. It assimilates in that corn. So we're already taking CO2 from the atmosphere there. And then we'll take that corn after it's grown with regenerative agriculture processes into our plants where we'll power those plants with renewable energy. And then we can, during that process of fermentation, we can actually remove the CO2 that is produced in a fermentation process and then move that along into producing both protein, corn oil, and finally our fuels, either ethanol or sustainable aviation fuel. It's really important that we think about those carbon removals like we're talking about during the process, because that's a net removal that was CO2 that was in the atmosphere. It came into our process. Part of that carbon ends up in the fuel. Part of that carbon then becomes the CO2 that we take out of the system and can sequester in deep wells like we do at Gevo, North Dakota, into our deep well geological formation through carbon capture and sequestration. When that product is finally used by an airline, or if the ethanol is burned in your engine of your car, that CO2 is actually released back into the atmosphere. We get the energy content, but that CO2 goes back into the air and it starts all over again. The important thing is, like, how do we do that, right? What's that system? And that's where the removals from in the process are really important. And also the removals that we can have from agriculture are super important as well.
So help me to understand emissions to carbon credits, right? To your point, fuel production typically emits fossil carbon, and Gevo captures and stores a biogenic carbon underground, turning it into the certified carbon removal credits. How do you achieve this? How does this true carbon removal differ from traditional avoidance offsets, and why does that matter?
Yeah, like I said, the important thing here is that in the process, we're taking biogenic carbon dioxide that was in the atmosphere. We're basically concentrating that up in the fermentation process, and it's a natural bioprocess that concentrates that CO2 that then we can use carbon capture and sequestration technology to put that permanently into deep well sequestration. So there's only certain types of geological formations that could do this, but we put this downhole over 6,500 feet, where it goes into a permanent formation where it will stay in place for over 1,000 years. So it's really a true removal in the system. And then when we total up all of the things that we're doing, we can ultimately end up with a fuel that even after it's burned, we have removed more CO2 equivalents. This is always our goal, that we've removed more CO2 equivalents than the fuel actually releases after we burn it for its energy content.
And then there's also multi-benefit outputs. For example, every carbon removal credit you generate, Gevo also produces 1 ton of food or feed and 1 ton of biofuel. How does having these integrated outputs create value across energy, agriculture, including climate solutions?
Yeah, so at Gevo, it's really important that when we're using land, we're always putting food first. So I think there's a big misconception that, you know, when you use corn for biofuels that you're not producing food, because it's always food and fuel. So every time we're doing this, we're really creating over 1 ton of protein feed that ultimately goes to things like for dairy, for beef production, for poultry, for swine. And at the same time, we're taking the carbohydrates to produce fuel. And now with this great capability that we have in North Dakota, we can take that carbon, and while we could take carbon dioxide and use it to carbonate our beverages, we can also capture that and then take that out of the cycle and basically put it in those deep well formation that we have for injection. So we're always getting the food, the fuel, and the carbon removal all at the same time. So really stackable benefits there that you're talking about, which we love.
And as I mentioned at the top, your credits are certified by Puro.Earth, accrediting program for engineered carbon removal, in which Nasdaq is the majority owner, ensuring that scientific rigor and permanence. Why is this certification so important for building trust in the voluntary carbon removal market?
Yeah, just like Gevo's approach at the very beginning, right, where we use Verity to track our entire business system to make sure that we're providing the truth and the transparency of what this carbon is. When you really get to a carbon removal, Puro has the best platform and certification standards to say this is a true removal, and how can you use the best science to prove that you've really done what you said you were going to do, which is to remove that carbon and store it downhole for over 1,000 years. So, it's been great to work with Puro. I think that, customers want to see that you have that scientific rigor and that you've been through a process that is certified by third parties, and you have the standard that you can trust, because ultimately they're paying good money to say, hey, we're really doing something and we're really offsetting our emissions by purchasing these carbon dioxide removal credits that Gevo is producing. So very important, critical for the market development that we have high quality standards that, global customers can really stand behind.
And Paul, finally, I want to wrap up discussing corporates, because many corporates are working toward long-term net zero targets. What role can carbon removal credits play in helping them achieve those goals today and also in the future?
Yeah, so I think this is, one place to look, and really appreciate being featured in Nasdaq's 2024 sustainability report. But, we offer something with these corks that can help, corporates really achieve their goals and for emissions by purchasing a cork. We know that carbon was in the atmosphere. It went downhole. It's sequestered for 1,000 years. You can feel good that you can purchase that and offset your emissions. And this is just one way that we can do that. The other things that we're really focused on doing is providing products like SAF in the future that will have all of that carbon value contained in the product, right? So this is how do we, so now we're talking not an offset, but an inset. And so as we're continuing to drive that value, we can sell sustainable aviation fuel to customers where they can feel good about tracking all the carbon, both the avoidance and the removals that we put into that product to help them meet their travel goals. And really, whether that's their business travel or freight that's shipped all over the world today, we're really confident that we can provide that with cost-effective solutions, along with the transparency and the trust that you really need for that market to develop.
Yeah, truly is a fascinating space to watch evolve here. Paul, appreciate your insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.